Hello and welcome back to another Mr. Carter Science Specials. This video is for the Edexcel GCSE Biology and Double Biology Science specifications, and today we'll be looking at the B2 Structure and Function of Living Things, B2 Respiration. So as always, I'd like you to consider making certain that you pause the video often, try the various different questions, attempt the questions and then review them with the answers. Also keep your eye out for the specification links so you know where you are in your specification. So today we're going to start with a little experiment. Try raising up your hand here. Straight in the air as high as you possibly can, and then I want you to open and close your fist as many times as you possibly can in 1 minute. You might want to do this as an investigation. Perhaps you could try your left hand versus your right hand. Which one can you open and close more in a minute? Or maybe if there's a number of people around you, try boys versus girls. Who can open and close their fist more in 1 minute? Pause the video now and try it. So now you've tried it, I bet your hand is really hurting. Why is that? Why is it that at the very beginning when you're opening and closing it's so easy, but later on it becomes so hard? Well, the answer to that very simply is this one word: respiration. And in fact there are two types of respiration. There is aerobic. And aerobic respiration provides you with lots of energy, but it does need oxygen. Aerobic respiration needs lots and lots of oxygen. And then there is anaerobic. An anaerobic does not need oxygen, but it produces a lot less energy. And when you're opening and closing your hand, initially in your muscles here, you've got lots and lots of oxygen, lots and lots of glucose provided by your blood flowing, so you can do lots and lots of this special chemical reaction, respiration. So you can release lots of energy, so it's really easy at the beginning. But because I've asked you to raise your hand as high as you possibly can above your head while you do this, it's harder and harder for the blood to flow up your arm. That means there's less glucose, less oxygen flowing to those cells in your muscles here. So they run out of oxygen and they have to start respiring anaerobically. And that produces a lot less energy. But it also produces a poison. And that poison is called lactic acid. And that lactic acid begins to build up, and that's what causes the pain and the cramps you may just have experienced. So what exactly is aerobic respiration? Well, in your exams you might be asked to write down the word equation, and we've got that word equation written down here. And it's glucose plus oxygen gives carbon dioxide plus water, and energy is released. Now, energy is not a chemical, so in your exam if you're asked to write the word equation, you do not write the energy in there. But you may be asked to write the chemical symbol equation, and we also have that here on this top line. It is also balanced, so you will always have to balance a chemical symbol equation. So we have glucose, which is C6H12 plus oxygen, and you need 6 molecules of that oxygen, so 6O2, and that gives us 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6CO2, plus 6 molecules of water, 6H2O. So I'll repeat that. C6H12O6 plus 6O2 gives 6CO2 and 6H2O. But you might be asked to describe or define respiration. So we've got a definition here, and we've got a little description here. And also over here, we've got to think about how does the glucose and the oxygen get into your cells, and where in a cell does respiration occur. So I'm going to give you a moment now just to pause this video, write these down and see if you can fill in the answers. So here are the answers. The definition of respiration is that respiration is a chemical reaction that occurs in all living things. And what happens during respiration, or describe what happens during respiration? Well, oxygen and glucose join together to form carbon dioxide and water, and energy is released in the form of ATP. ATP is a special chemical which is the source of energy in a cell. So any chemical reactions that need some energy in a cell, that energy will come from ATP, and ATP carries that energy around the cell. How does the oxygen and the glucose actually get to the cells? Well, oxygen and glucose are carried around the body in the blood, and oxygen and glucose can then diffuse from the blood into the cells which need to carry out respiration. And respiration occurs in the mitochondria. You might remember that from our cells video. So aerobic respiration uses oxygen, but there is also anaerobic respiration, which your body will use when there is not enough oxygen available. So when this happens, for example, if you're running a very fast race and you've used up all the oxygen that's available to your muscles want to continue to produce energy. So they will actually produce less energy than you would have in aerobic respiration, but at least you're producing energy. So the formula in words is glucose is broken down to produce lactic acid. Of course, some energy is released, but that's not a chemical, so we don't write it down. In terms of the chemical equation, it will be C6H12O6 gives 2 molecules of C3H6O3. Lactic acid, of course, is a poison. It causes muscle cramps. So after you finish the race, your body must get rid of this lactic acid. So even when you've run a long race, you will stop at the finish line and you will still breathe heavily, even though you no longer need to produce all of that movement and need the energy for that. Why are you still breathing heavily? Well, you still need a large amount of oxygen to break down that lactic acid. And that extra oxygen you need at the end of your exercise to break down lactic acid, that's known as oxygen debt. So anaerobic respiration occurs not only in animals but also in plants and yeast. For example, this can happen in the roots of plants which live in waterlogged soils, for example rice, or it can happen in yeasts when they don't have enough oxygen and they are wanting to produce alcohols. The formula for this is glucose is broken down and turned into ethanol, and carbon dioxide is released, as well as a small amount of energy. So plants and yeast that undergo anaerobic respiration actually produce ethanol, which is a type of alcohol. This is used a lot in the brewing process, where yeast is initially grown with a large amount of oxygen, and then they remove the oxygen away, so the yeast begins to produce ethanol, and you'll often see a frothy gas on the top of the brew where carbon dioxide gas has gathered. In terms of rice, here we've got some rice plants growing. Rice plants are grown in extremely waterlogged soil, very damp, watery rice paddies. And this is brilliant because it prevents any other plants growing, so there's less competition for all the nutrients that are there. But that does mean that all the water seeps into the pores of the soil, so there's no space for oxygen in the soil. So the roots and the root hair cells of the plants can't get any oxygen, and that means that they can't carry out aerobic respiration, which means they have less ability to produce energy for use in things like active transport. So most plants will die because of that, because they won't be able to actively transport the minerals and therefore water by osmosis that they need. However, rice has a high tolerance for ethanol in its root hair cells, so the ethanol won't build up and kill those root hair cells, so it can continue taking the small amount of energy that's produced and use that in active transport. So here's a quick exam question for you, and I would suggest that you pause the video now and try this out, see if you can get 6 marks for this. I've got a picture of a plant which has died because somebody has overwatered it. Can you explain how that happened? Pause the video now, see if you can get 6 marks. If you need some extra help, look at the next slide. So here is some extra help for that particular question. How can a plant die due to overwatering? See if you can fill in the gaps if you need the extra help. I'll give you the answer in a moment. So, how would you get your 6 marks? Well, a plant in waterlogged soil will have poor growth because water prevents root hair cells from absorbing the oxygen. The root hair cells do not have enough oxygen to respire aerobically, so they must respire anaerobically. Anaerobic respiration produces less ATP, so there's less ATP for active transport, which means less minerals and nitrates are absorbed. These minerals are needed by leaves to grow healthy and strong, so the plant will grow poorly. Anaerobic respiration also produces ethanol, which is a poison and can kill the root hair cells. So if you count up the ticks here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ticks there. So you had a chance of getting 7 marks out of the 6 available in total. So let's look at some evidence that link together respiration and energy. In particular, heat energy. Here we've got an investigation where a student has taken 2 vacuum flasks, and vacuum flasks are very good at trapping heat energy in. They prevent any energy from leaving and also any energy from the environment entering the flask. And this student has filled flask A with some living peas. If you're not certain what a pea is, there's some peas here. He's then taken some of those peas and boiled them, and then he's killed those peas, let them cool back down to room temperature and put them into flask B. So flask B is full of dead peas. But each flask has a thermometer in them there. Each flask has got a thermometer in, so we can measure the temperature that's inside the flask. And the student will leave these for 72 hours. So your job now, predict how the temperature in the 2 flasks will change. Try and explain your answer. So these are the results. In flask A, which remember had the living peas, the temperature, as you can see, went from 15 to 20, 25, 29, 31, 33, 33. And in flask B, which had the dead peas, the temperature every time was 15 degrees. How would we plot these on a graph? Well, first thing, we would look at this column here, and this column, the second column, will always be the dependent variable, the thing we're measuring. So we will draw that in this x-axis here, the y-axis. So temperature, don't forget the units, in degrees C. The one on the bottom we would put is the time in hours, because we've chosen when to measure that. Time in again, time in hours. So for flask A, and I'll do flask A in an orange colour, the temperature would have started around 15 degrees and it would have gradually begun to increase. And that's for flask A. In flask B, the temperature started at 15 degrees, but it stayed the same throughout. Pause the video now, have a think, can you describe these graphs, and what's the conclusion for the experiment? So these are our results then. The conclusion. The peas in flask A were alive, they were living cells, so living cells respire, and we have the proof here the temperature went up because respiration releases energy, and some of that energy is heat energy, so the temperature in the flask increased. Dead pea cells do not respire, so the temperature stays the same. And you should know this because if you go out for exercise when you are respiring a lot, producing a lot of energy, you get hotter and hotter as you exercise more and more because your cells in the mitochondria are respiring more and more, releasing more energy. So thank you for watching this Mr. Carter special video on respiration. Don't forget to like and share and look out for the next videos coming. Thank you very much. Goodbye.